Hey, everybody, welcome back to another season of Railroad Empires. Season 2 is going to be a little different than season 1. We're kind of shooting for a more intermediate level show this season. We're going to do another 10 episodes, but the format's going to be a little different. This show and the last show are going to be roughly 45 minutes. All the shows in between are going to be right about 30-minute shows, so hopefully we can pick up a few more viewers and subscribers and all that good stuff. Tonight we're going to be talking about moving from tables to shelf style layouts. This is also going to be open panel discussion, so you know how that stuff usually goes. All bets are off, really.
No boxing gloves.
Gloves are off, man. Let's start with Ari. What's your take?
So like everybody, I started at the floor on the carpet, and then, as a kid, and then worked my way up to a tabletop, and ran that for a long time. Even through college, I had a board either under the bed or on top of the bed or against the wall, and I still technically think what I'm doing is tabletop, but it's around the walls. And I know that's up for argument on what we're considering a tabletop, but I think generally it's the 4x8 center of the room that you walk around, and I've been there. It was fun, but as you progress through model railroading and get better with your skills, you want more, and you want to build something that's more realistic and something that represents your vision. And a lot of people, model railroader back in the day, man, that was what people had. They had the tabletop, they had the family around it. That was like the Christmas setup. My family had that as well growing up. So just it's a common thing that's a good gateway into the hobby. I also think like what I have with the frame bench work, it's 4x2 or 4x or 48 by 28 inches with plywood and the foam on top to give you some elevation changes. But I think once you start cutting into it and start making the cookie cutter, then you really you're graduating from your tabletop into something more realistic with more elevation and some more dimension to it.
Nice. Andy, what about you? What's your take on the topic?
But as always, I tend to see it as kind of a complicated thought process of
everything's complicated with you.
It is complicated, but it is complicated. There are a lot of a range of choices. It's not just about any one of the things from construction methodology, etc. But it's more of a how does the layout exist in the room and how do you interact with it is what I think defines. That's how I would take argument with Ari's position of his being a tabletop. It's not dissimilar from a tabletop in a construction standpoint. You built your peninsula in much the same ways as you would build a table layout. While I'm building mine out of some unusual materials, non-standard, it's not 1x4s. It's a peninsula, it's a table, effectively, with a bunch of around the wall stuff. I think it has more to do with how you, or I would think we should encourage people to especially new people, to not necessarily go down this table in a room that you walk all the way around philosophy, and instead think about shelves first as a form factor. However you choose to build that, whether that's 2 foot deep tables against the wall, building 1x4 construction, whether that's hollow core doors or shelf brackets and foam or whatever the construction methodology is, it's about how you interact with it. I think they ultimately take about the same amount of space. I mean, a 4x8 layout takes 8x10 or 8x12 feet, rather, 8x12 feet of space because you need 2 foot minimum to get around it. Assuming a 2 foot center peninsula. If you've got an 8x12 space to work in, and around the walls gives you more layout. So do you want to put a layout that takes 30-ish square feet, 32 square feet, and have a whole lot of room for a dozen people to walk around that in some, tight considerations? Or do you want a layout that takes all of the exterior space, some 80 square feet or something, and that you exist in that center section as an
You know what? I actually have some examples that'd be perfect right here. So let me flip my camera over, and I can show you these examples of my first couple of layouts while Andy's talking.
Yeah, I've got a few computer screenshots too. I mean, for sure, that's a table design. Even if you augment it the way he has with a little, as you'll see in some later pictures he's done again, it is ultimately a table design against a wall on one side or otherwise, and it's taking up a big space. And the layout that he built later, that was a shelf configuration, felt, at least to me, and I'd imagine that layout, I would imagine, felt like a much bigger, more complicated, a lot more mainline, a lot more trackage, a lot more interesting scenically, but it's taking the exact same amount of space. It's probably taking a pretty similar amount of construction materials. It takes a bit more time, obviously.
So from my experience, the benefit from going from a table layout, which my table layout, was this. This was the final rendition, right? So it went from 8 by 8 in a 10 by 12 foot room. And I mean, you see how little actual track work is there. It's a double main on the lower table, an incline in the middle in the lower table, and then it's pretty much a single loop on the back table there. I had 2 feet of space on this side here and about 4 feet of space on this side here. And there was really no room to move around, do any other work or anything like that. It was all right there. I actually ended up having to put my workstation area in the closet that's like just off to this side of the bench. And it was horrible. I mean, most of these guys remember. It wasn't all that like 4 years ago.
I remember that layout. I remember that.
So then I decided, you know what? I've had enough of this. I was crawling on the tables all the time.
Hang on. We talked you into doing this one.
Absolutely. But I decided I'd had enough, and I talked to these guys, and I'm like, okay, what's the best option? This was the result of all the advice they had given me, which I don't exactly remember what it all was verbatim, but this is basically what we ended up with. So you've got the roughly, I cut all the plywood down into 16-inch shelves or 2-foot shelves. Yeah. And I reused all that plywood. So I didn't get any extra plywood. I just used all the same plywood here. I did get one extra sheet for the peninsula. But that's it. All of the wood you see that's holding up the foam is all from the original two layouts,
so
or 2 tables.
Layout. It's the same size layout.
Yeah, but there's a ton more space because I was able to cut it up into smaller sections, get more layout out of it, because I can transition from the lower to the upper, which I actually did. I don't have any pictures of that. I'm so disappointed in myself. But I also gained a whole lot more room, and I actually had workspace over here now, and a computer, and all my tools, and all this stuff over here. So much better.
And what you experience with that is what a lot of people experience with the tabletop. You come to a limit, or you come to a problem, and usually the problem is you can't reach the center of the layout. People, when you like read Model Railroad, or you see some of the older track plans, it's always a big loop with like a crossover in the middle. What happens in the middle of the train derails? You can't get it. You have to crawl on top of the table. You have the limited reachability to the center of your table, and you think there's got to be something better than this. And the answer is yes, there is. Around the walls.
Yep, around the wall.
And you can use the same amount of plywood as what you get in a 4x8 sheet if you cut it right.
Yeah, and even when you're building stuff like it, you still have the planning of, can I reach this? There's certain, like if you do like I always call it like a keystone, or like a key where you have a big balloon track that loops back. You can't reach the center of it. So the tracks have either got to be, you got to have some sort of access hatch, or you got to really plan your layout well, where you have nothing impeding your access to get to that back side of the track.
Yeah. So with a shelf layout, you get a lot more trackage that way.
Yeah,
and basically the same space.
And think about how much more linear track work you get, or the railroad will call it tangent, or we might call it straight track work. On the prototype, even some of the most mountainous of railroads still have a preponderance of tangent or straight trackage, but on a table layout, you have virtually none. It's you have very little. If you're going around the walls, you could straighten out, stretch that layout out, stretch the trains out. The visual appearance is also just a lot more like what we're used to seeing in the real world. When I drive up to a grade crossing in the real world, I'm used to seeing a train in front of me going across and out of the distance in one direction, out the distance in the other, and that lateral positioning. that's how a shelf layout gives it to you. So people always navigate toward it because to shelf design because it's a much more appealing presentation. My argument would be it's a better place to start as well. And this idea of starting on a table, the way I started and had many, and all of us for the most part started with table layout design. I think these newer crop of modelers that are coming up these days that are more interested in the prototype, it's time to break that old tradition. Probably none of us are starting with trade sets anymore anyway. It's time to break that tradition and go straight to shelf design. They're more portable, easier to move, easier to construct, fit into more different types of places, and you can build a module at a time in the kind of TOBA thought processing.
I don't. I mean, I agree with you, but I disagree with you at the same time because honestly, if I had to go back and do it again, I wouldn't do a double table layout like I did the first time, but I definitely do a table layout the first time, knowing I'm going to cut it up eventually, because I was able to learn so much doing that and building that table, because I built both of those tables by myself from scratch. Yeah. So I was able to learn a lot doing that and building my layout and what to do, what not to do, different techniques. It was great to learn on. I don't know that I would go straight to shelf personally if I had it to do over again, only because there's a lot of bumps and hiccups in tables that you got to learn before you move on and get better.
Well, the other thing about shelf layouts, you can use a lot broader curves than you're limited on curve radius on a table.
Right. And when you see your big boy running around an 18-inch loop and it just looks like hot garbage, it's all hanging over by about 6 inches and it just looks nasty. You learn why you want bigger curves,
Or you're running 89-foot long, freight cars and they're hanging over by 5-6 inches. As you got
the entire mid-length of the car hanging off the track.
They look okay from the inside of the curve. On the outside of the curve, they look ridiculous.
Like you could say real model railroaders like the curves, so
yeah.
I would say for anybody out there that's sitting in this table layout situation right now, I would say just plan on cutting it down and switching to a shelf, man, because shelf's the way to go. You're gonna get a lot better quality out of your layout than you will on a table.
And
I'm
not suggesting that necessarily that. I am a big believer in the concept of a chainsaw layout. People don't like the idea of putting money into something they're going to destroy, putting heart and soul into building something knowing they're going to destroy it. I think it's easier to just get people to accept that is a very likely outcome to begin with. It's very unlikely. You're going to have to learn the skills. And these skills require the actual construction of something. You can't learn that, there is a destructive process in constructing something, in building something. You have to destroy some products, some scenery materials, and track and other things in order to put something together. I'm not opposed to saying a table's fine for sure. And I think scale has some implication as to whether a table's the right approach or not. I just think that people have a tendency to either build a table and stick with it longer than they should possibly, or how many people build a table layout, buy a sheet of plywood, run a circle of track, realize that's boring, et cetera, and end up with a box of stuff in the floor of their closet. My biggest concern always is the people that I think that I would want to speak to more than anybody else is the people who for some reason lost interest or what have you, that have a box of stuff at the bottom of a closet, because that's a lot more people than who are actively building layouts, actually. My instinct is that that's the case. And they have not been introduced to these more modern thoughts on form factor and layout design earlier, like I think they should have. They haven't been exposed to operations and the things that all people who are lifelong model railroaders end up with into a certain set of things. It takes some people 10 years, a few people 2 years, a few people 30 years to get to these places. But just about all of us either end up in one of a couple places. Either craftsmen who are just builders, and it's ultimately a big diorama. Nothing against that. I love to build the stuff. So I fit into that category to a bit of a degree. And the guys who are operators. And they're often two different camps, but I think there's a lot of us these days that the prototype guys that are a bit of a crossover between those two and like the operations. But what do you do with it after you built it if you're not into some other thing, some extension of it? And that goes from form factor to construction philosophy to what your lifetime as a modeler is going to be.
Well, and around the room layout or a shelf layout around the room, you can actually fit a little bit more layout than you could if you did a 4x8 sheet in a smaller room.
More than a little bit.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Because you got that 4x8 sheet sit in the middle of the room, you can't get around it at all. But you cut that 4x8 sheet up and put it as shelves around the wall, and you can still enter the room and have your layout at the same time. So you could actually put a 4x8 sheet in a 10x10 room.
Think if you swap the two spots out, mentally, we kind of wrap your head around. You have a 4x8 sheet of plywood setting on sawhorses, whatever your arrangement is, as a mental experiment, and a 2-foot aisle around the outside. Or you have a 2-foot layout with a 4-foot by 8-foot aisle in the middle. Mm-hmm. They take they're going to take ultimately roughly the same amount of materials to build. You're going to end up with a lot more layout around the outside. Do you want all that space around the outside for people to stay in? If it's only going to be you and a few other people potentially, especially true, and it's not a display layout, for example, or do you want the spot for 2 or 3, 4 people in the middle of the layout wrapping around you and closing you? And there's every advantage to the shelf design, but they're also easier to build. It's a misnomer that the table is the right way to start, in my personal opinion, because they're harder to construct. I mean, anybody started, I think a hollow core door and a sheet of styrofoam is.
And Andy, the 4x8 sheet is an extension of playing with your train on the carpet.
Yes.
All you're doing is lifting it off the floor, and you now have the loop on a board. And you're elaborating a little bit by having extra loops and crossovers and things like that.
And
but basically, it's a floor layout.
So and again, just to Tim's point here, I mean, this is the exact same room in these first 2 pictures. Exact same room. Didn't change that at all. But you see how much difference there is.
It's an entirely different layout, an entirely different experience as a hobbyist. It's an entirely different level of expression for somebody else to walk in, a visitor to walk in and see. It just represents 2 very different experiences.
And it also makes that room look bigger when you've got it set up like that. It just visually makes the room look bigger.
The answer is no.
Okay.
Big Bill asked what a chainsaw layout is, and I love that term. Think of it as a disposable layout, a layout you're going to take a chainsaw to. So it's a learning experience. It's a test diorama. It's a 4x8 sheet of plywood and styrofoam that you're going to try all these techniques out on, knowing you're going to take a chainsaw to it and destroy it. And people hate that, but you've got to learn. So think of it as the investment in the education. Whatever money and experience is lost on building a layout that you effectively destroy in order to build the next iteration. And I don't care how experienced a modeler there are. Most of us have several layouts in us for sure. You need to be able to wash your hands of it when your skills have gone on, and to write that money off as the cost of the education it took to learn the skill sets.
And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to waste the whole thing, because there could be sections of it that you can reuse. Just depends on how you actually build and design it.
But it's structures and rolling stocks. There's obvious stuff.
I'm talking about some of your scenery and stuff. Depending on how you do your scenery, you can reuse some of your scenery items.
Absolutely. But
my old door layouts that I did when I had an apartment are now my workbenches. It's where I airbrush. It's where I store my off layout models that I'm working on. Being a model railroader, we save everything, and we always think when we see something, I can use this on the railroad. You see a cable on the street, and you're like, my wife's going to hate me for this, but I can use it on the railroad,
What's bad, Ari, is when or I don't know if it's bad or if it's a good thing, is when your wife sees stuff like that and goes, oh, you can use that on the railroad.
Oh, that's a good thing.
That's good.
That's good when she's helping.
Definitely a good thing.
This is a funny story. When me and my wife got married, she had fake eyelashes put on, like to extend her eyelashes. They're now somewhere down here to use on my railroad, because I was like, that's going to make some good cattails somewhere.
Not just cattails, but you could also straighten them out and use the clearance guides for tunnels.
Yeah. Telltales, I think those are what those are.
Telltales.
That's an N scale, of course.
Yeah.
Model
Throw that together.
Railroader had an article on using them as telltales at one time.
Mm-hmm. So here's I had the great fortune to run into a master model railroader in my young 20s when I was working at a hardware store, and he was ordering all kinds of weird stuff. And I was like, I know what this guy's doing. And I said, hey man, are you building the model railroad? And he's like, just based on the sheer amount of caulk that he was buying and plywood. And he goes, yeah, you want to come over and help me work on it? And I said, absolutely. And so he's a master model railroader. He's famous in the game for what he does. He does the C&O Clifton Forge division, and his layout doesn't have legs. He built his basement with metal brackets. So he designed 2x6s against the wall, and where he knew his bench height was going to be, he did 2x6s lengthwise. And he takes steel brackets pre-made for his railroad, and he bolts them in. There's no legs. It's three decks, and you can
I don't have legs on mine either.
And it's, you want to talk about gorgeous. And he's got the curtains come down, so he still uses storages underneath of it. Wiring's clean, no legs, no obstructions.
Yep.
And a really, really cool experience. I hope one day I'll get there and my railroad will be just as cool. But, you learn to crawl. And that's what a tabletop is. You're learning to crawl. You're figuring out, do I like this? And if the answer is yes, then you play with that for a while and you say, what's next?
What's next? What's
next is the shelf layout.
Well, so just to kind of expand on that a minute, I'm building this 13 by 15 footer here. This is the left-hand side of it, right? But you see it's got a pair of legs on each section. I've already been thinking about when we finally buy our own house, I'm going to put everything up around the walls on French cleats so that I don't have to worry about legs or anything like that.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where one day we'll do an expansion on this house, or we'll move and new railroad, maybe it'll stay like it is. Maybe I'll just do an expansion on it. But if I can frame the walls in and get it off the floor or off these legs, I'm going to.
I love having the floor clear. The peninsula has been challenging. I've been building mine lately that's all hanging from the ceiling. And that's been a bit of a craziness to figure out. It's taken me a year and a half since Ralph first suggested that I should do such a crazy thing. But I think it's worth it.
Right. Blame it all on Ralph. It's all Ralph's fault.
It's slightly
Isn't it, though?
Well, Ralph slightly mentioned it, and I, as is typical, I went down the rabbit hole with the thing, and it's been a crazy learning experience. It's always a learning experience. You're going to be learning all the way.
Andy, it wasn't a rabbit hole. You went into the attic.
I don't know who's worse about rabbit holes, you or Marty, but man, y'all got some problems.
Here's the thing about being in this group. If we ever have a problem or an issue, we always just blame it on each other. Oh, it's your fault. You convinced me to do it.
Yeah.
There's a bit of that. No
Ralph tried to get my brand new locomotives I got a couple weeks ago to catch on fire. He's building these trains, man.
The consequence of offering suggestions. So, but they're great. The layout's ended up better for it. I have had to redo things, but as I said before, the few things that I'm actually considerably happy with right now are the things I had to do a couple times over. So, and I'm fine with it. By all means, if a table is the right path to get you there, I'm just afraid that a lot of people start with a table and give up, put stuff in a box before they ever move on to something that will really be meaningful for them. And if we could get more people building shelf layouts, just buy a couple holocore doors and get started. And it's not going to be for everybody, but if you're going to enjoy that holocore door experience, you're likely to enjoy the hobby for the long term.
I kind of agree, but the thing is, you start getting into Robert's good with the programming, the 3D programming of what do you call it, the layout.
Yeah,
I found that very tedious, very hard to pick up quickly to do my layout. So what I ended up doing is I took the brown wrapping paper that you see post office packages wrapped in, the brown craft paper.
Yep.
And I pinned it up on all my walls that I was going to put a shelf on. And between my son and I, we went around and we drew the layout the way we wanted to see it. And that's what we ended up with. And I'll show you a picture. This is...
Why are you?
Once I had it laid out on the paper, and I used the PDFs cut out of turnouts and crossovers and things like that, and where I wanted buildings, I pinned them up on the paper, and it was just a matter of transferring it down to a wood frame like you see there, which basically is a shelf. So you can see all the turnouts. This is going into my yard. This is where my turntable sits right here. But I couldn't pick up the three, and I used 3 different programs to try and get used to, and it just wasn't working for me. So I said, piss on it. I'm going for the one-to-one drawing on the wall. That's what I'm familiar with. That's what I did. And I didn't draw it in 2 lines as tracks. I drew it as a center line of the track. And from that's what I converted over to my layout. And that's the way it sits now, as 19 by 10 room.
We got a couple things from the chat. Why Run Naked is poking the bear and says DCC or DC. Which is a debate that can go on to eternity. But Big Bill asks, what do we like about our railroads? Like, what is our favorite thing on our railroad right now that we're working on? That's a great question.
I'm gonna quickly answer that first question, and we're gonna leave it there. There are benefits to both. I would say if you are looking to get in cheaper at the start, go with DC. If that's not an issue, go straight for DCC, because you're going to get a whole lot more bang for your buck out of DCC.
Yeah.
What was the second question, Ari?
What do we like? What's our favorite feature on our railroads, for each of our railroads?
Mine has.
I'm going to let Ralph start. I'm going to let Ralph start that one.
My layout has a lot of rock work. I was doing a rock garden for my wife with 4.5 ton of rocks, and every time I placed a rock, I thought to myself, this would make a good mold to put on the layout. So I made my own molds of the sides of the rocks, and I have a scenery here that's about, I don't know, 2 feet tall, goes across to my harbor, which comes down to, I got an 8-foot bridge in there. I'm also a winemaker, so I have this doorway that goes into my wine cellar. I need access to my wine cellar, so I had to put a gate in. Now, the gate opens. I can't open it fully because of the Mac screen that's here, but it opens, and I can get full access to that door. But my entrance over there is not impeded by any track work. So I have a loop here, goes around to the other side. So I have a loop on either side of the entrance. And I don't have any problem walking into the layout. Some people like duck unders. Because of my back problems, duck under is not an issue for me. I mean, it's not a thing I'm going to use. No way in hell. Even though I started in a crawl space and I took some office chairs and I cut them down so the seat is a foot off the floor so that I could sit up tall in the seat and my hair just clipped the joists above me. That's what I'm working at. So now those chairs are for working underneath my layout here, but it's a shelf. My basic shelf is 2 foot from the wall. This here is 1 foot from the wall. Where my turnarounds are 5.5, 5 feet. My helix is 6 feet, and I have a 26-foot gauntlet track around the helix that saved me 1.5 feet of aisle space. So you have to think of these things when you're building. What are you going to do? Mine is not modeled after any specific railroad. It's a fantasy railroad for me, but it's based on Canadian National CP operations in the mountains, and over here I have a barge scene, so it's down by the water as well. So I got it all encompassed in one.
Tim, what's yours?
Currently has to be my rock work over there on the big curve. That turned out really, really well. It's, you know, this scene right there. The rocks came out really good. The little water next to it came out really good. I was going to say my waterfall scene, but it's kind of faded over time because I didn't seal the plaster before I put the stains on it. So they soaked in, and the rocks looked really good when they first on there. You can ask, most of the guys in here, but now it's all almost gray because
there's a trick to that,
It all soaked in. Well, I did that trick with this one. I painted them with an acrylic paint first.
No. It doesn't matter whether you paint it with acrylic first. You soak them with water. You paint it the color you want, and then you use the Scenic cement, the spray that Woodland Scenics has, and it captures the paint at the surface. It doesn't let it soak right in. Just a little tip. You can use it next time.
I'll try.
Ari, what's yours?
So mine's my railroad's built for operations. And it's a railroad that I grew up on. I've lived on different parts of this railroad my entire life. And my railroad, both the prototype and my model railroad, I modeled 2 old main lines. So the railroad reconfigured and put in a straighter main line, bypassing cities because the cities were getting bogged down with auto traffic. So I modeled 2 abandoned portions of the old main line. And these two old main line areas are loaded with industry. And I can operate for hours switching out 4 industries without touching my main line. So if I want to come down and just switch out my power plant, do it realistic, it take me 3 hours to bring in the cars up, pulling them through my coal dump, putting them on the outbound track and pulling a new train into the inbound track and getting ready for the next morning. And that's the first thing. That's the first operation on my railroad in the morning. I also have a paper plant, which is right here over my shoulder, and that's got chemicals. It's got bentonite clay that comes in. It's got paper fiber that comes in. It's got rolls of paper that come out. And, the trains, I think I could pull about 6 cars up on the old main, which is how it is in real life. It's really old track. It can't take much weight. 4-axle only locomotives. Pull up a cut of cars, switch them in and out, put the old ones out for the yard, and you're talking an hour and a half. So either I can run trains and watch them go around my layout on the main track, or I could come down here and just switch, do basically 2 switching puzzles. And depending on how I feel, that's what I'll do. And I like that I have that flexibility. And if I follow my own rules, closing the switches as I open them and putting them back in the spot, when I come back down the next day, it's ready to run again.
All right, Andy, what about you?
I think it's so fun. The couple of things that people I think it's interesting what your all's favorites are. Scenery tends to be a popular thing around all modelers, and the thing that I was the most nervous and contentious about building this layout. That's why I did some scenery first, to see if I could even be satisfied with my artistry whatsoever, because I'm an engineer in every mindset, professionally and education, etc. And I just didn't know if I could do the artistry side of the hobby. And I still think that's the weakest of my skill sets, is on the artistry side. And there are things in the scenery where I am having success. But in all, trees, I've done, some things I'm adequately satisfied by for now. But in all things I've done scenery, I'm sure that what I'm doing in a few years will be so much better than anything I've done recently. So I hope that all of that stuff gets a lot better than it currently has. there's things that I'm dissatisfied with that I would probably change a little bit. The only thing that I'm super pleased with is the thing that we're talking about tonight, is the decision about the form factor and how the layout's put together. Because it's a pseudo mushroom. It's like a half of a mushroom, so it's like a mushroom that's been stepped on or something that was damaged in the woods or something. I don't know. It's a weird design formulation with multi decks and narrow shelves that I wish I had made more narrow. I overestimated what was going to be required to make a scenery look, bold. But I'm happy with the form factor. That shadow box style, which this is the first line I've ever built. It was this style, a shadow box style. I built around the walls, but this is the first of this where I've really thought about the aesthetic of the design.
You're constraining views.
Yes. Yeah, constraining your viewing angles and messing with human psychology to kind of encourage people to stand in one place versus another place. Because of my obstructing views, I can get people to stand in other places.
Go ahead, Ralph.
No, I don't have anything to say. Just thought I'd put that up. Just something to see. That's part of my harbor scene.
Yeah, and that looks really good. I'm actually totally jealous.
No.
So for me, the thing I'm excited about the most is this particular scene here. So while the bridge bents and the 3 inches of foam are all temporary, I went ahead and built this in like this and designed it to have this drop in because I'm shooting for a waterfall scene over a gorge kind of a thing. So the only thing in real question at the moment is, do I do a curved wooden trestle, or do I go a plate girder, a curved plate girder steel bridge? That's the only two questions I have right now. But I'm planning on doing a waterfall and there's a sharp gorge area here with a river running down through the middle. I'm even kind of thinking about doing real water, which is going to be interesting if I actually decide to go that route.
I've done it.
You don't want to use real water.
Years ago, it got popular in the 80s or something to do that for a while. And I think it can be done with something other than water, but you need something that has a different viscosity, like mineral oil. You need something like that. I think that'd be interesting. You also have stagnation problems and other things with pure water, whereas mineral oil, I think, would be.
No,
but
you don't want to go that route at all.
Oh, I don't think so either. I think resin's the right answer. But if you wanted to try,
this is why I'm still having that debate. It's almost like the DC versus DCC debate. There's things on both sides. Just saying.
And I have to agree with Bob on that. I think your best bet would be a wood trestle because man, that would just make that scene.
Mm-hmm.
And I like the steel trestles better. It's all a matter of preference. To me, railroading looks like those steel trestles. That's what my has. That's what I grew up with.
What era are you doing, Robert?
So I'm basically running 83 to present. So I could. There are still wooden trestles around, that I can find current.
By this time, the wooden trestles have been replaced by plate girder and steel bents, which lend themselves best to that scene.
Especially after 2020 when all those wooden bridges burnt this last year.
Yes.
And it's all, I would think it has a lot to do with what you're trying to recreate or the location. So if it's a very lightly traveled secondary or third class line that they don't care if it has an outage for a couple weeks while they're dealing with the problem, then wood trestles still to this day, I could show you places where there are wood trestles on branch lines. But if they needed to depend on it, where it couldn't have that outage, or it was heavier traffic, where it made enough money to justify it, then they put steel or concrete or something in.
So let's put it this way: to do it in wood, you're going to take an awful long time to build that trestle.
Yep.
And it's going to have to, because it's a show place, like it's right out front.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to have to be to the nth degree.
Yeah,
You're
I mean,
do all the bolt and washer and rivet and all that kind of stuff. That's all going to have to be there.
It's right on the end of the peninsula. You can see it just as you turn the corner into the layout. Like, holy, it's right there. It's in your face. So, yeah, it would have to be done to the nth degree.
But that's
And
why
I think
the wood trestle would, man, that'd just make that scene, though.
yeah, it would, but
it's a lot of work.
Yeah, it's a lot.
I'm going to spend 3 years just building that trestle. Probably, if I go that route, probably what I'll do is go with a steel bridge, a steel bent bridge or something like that, and
temporary.
then temporarily until I can build in the wood trestles.
I had the same dilemma, Robert. I ended up with the same problem, and I ended up going with wood.
Yeah, see,
that just makes the scene.
But then Andy got mad at me because I used styrofoam to build up my rock work in the background. He says, I thought you used cardboard and plaster cloth. Well, I do, on top of what I use to basic form.
I want to address a couple things that were mentioned in the chat. Why are you naked? Was saying his layout's all in his head. And there's the plus to shelf layout. Is if you don't think you have the room, look in your living room. I mean, granted, if you're married, she may or may not like it, or whatever. But look in your living room. You've got a bunch of shelf space in your living room. You can put a layout up. I mean, look at what DeBob's done. He's got it running all the way through his whole house.
He's got a very forgiving wife.
It's true.
Well, and my wife actually put one up in our dining room.
Yeah.
But you can put
Even more reason to build a railroad.
Yeah.
They don't have to be permanent fixtures either. It's also easier to take one wall of a garage or some other space like that and still be able to park a car in there. And it's not
a spare bedroom. Spare bedroom with a shelf. It's still a bedroom.
Yep.
But now it's got a shelf. So you have visitors. You don't play with trains when you have visitors.
Unless they want to play with trains.
Exactly.
So that series that Big Bill just did with the small railroads, big opportunities, or I can't remember exactly what the title was for it, but I was really inspired by that series, and I got a good sized railroad in N scale, and I'm like, I could build another one. I could build another shelf layout, just to get that.
You better just finish the one you got.
I know.
My daughter's one around her ceiling.
Yeah, if you don't think you have the room, you probably do. And granted, there's always the compromises with your cohabitants in your house, but my wife tells me this is my hobby. This is what I do. This is what I spend my money on. It's not booze. It's not anything else. It's not cars. It's not. I'm in the basement. I'm home. He knows where I'm at. I ain't going anywhere.
Right. You're not out with the boys carousing.
I'm not out with the boys. If they want to come over and play trains, then come on over.
But if your layout is large enough, it probably needs to be a permanent fixture. But to get started, building a few 6-foot or 4-foot or whatever shelves, a couple holocore doors that can be leaned up on a wall inside of a closet or the corner of a room, that's quite a bit of layout that can be taken out from time to time. If you have a very much less than optimal, but at least you're moving forward on your plan. That's another reason where I like the shelf design. You can change the track work design, layout, different track work, whatever you're putting forward, whatever your bench work components are, holocore door or L-girder framework or whatever it is, all of that's just going to grow into another layout. So I do plan on growing this layout I have. It is planned to be moved because it all likely will be moved. And at such a time as that I can grow and expand the layout, but I intend this layout to be some component of my layouts for the rest of my life. Although I do hope that my skills get better and that it looks better. But my hope is that I'm not putting any energy into something that will not just be continued, grown, and improved upon in the future. If I do replace it, I'll replace it a module or two at a time. But this is a lifetime commitment now on this layout, or at least I hope that it is, because this is the 13th layout that I've built. And
another thing with the shelf layouts is you can build them modularly, so you can slide out sections and slide them in, and build scenery on them, but don't attach it to the wall. Build it out of styrofoam.
or build a backdrop to it so you just slide it in and slide it in place. You know, and that way you're not, if she doesn't want it fully attached to the wall, you just, you know, it's a shelf up there with a layout sitting on top of it.
But I think this is key too. Look at all the people who are in the hobby. Look at the 100,000+ model railroaders that are out there. You know, some of them are not active modelers, but most are, or a whole lot of people are. There's a lot of layouts in this country. A lot. Go look at the layout tours in a city in St. Louis when they're putting them on. A town the size of St. Louis, which is not a huge town, but has 50 layouts that are going to be on tour, and there's other layouts that aren't going to be on tour, and plenty of other layouts that people don't want to see, and plenty of smaller layouts. There's hundreds of layouts in that town. There are still quite, you know, yes, our hobby is possibly diminished in the numbers that it did back in the train set eras before, but the guys who are doing it these days are much more serious about it, I think, than a lot of your more casual modelers years ago. But there's a lot of layouts out there. Look at the guys who've been in the hobby for a while, and look at the things that they have chosen to do. All of those people cannot be wrong. Now, your choices might be different, but show me some guys who've been in the hobby who are not DCC at this point, not to reinvigorate that debate, but most people are DCC. You got a few people who are holdouts for DC, and there are arguments for that. But the same thing's true about layout form factors. How many people you know that have built large layouts, that have built many, many layouts, are still building table layouts over and over and over again? There are a few. They're the exception that proves the rule, I guess, but they're exceptions to the rule. Just about everybody has switched to a shelf style of arrangement, to that form factor, and a lot of people do this more shadow box style with lighting balances and such. But you know, how many people do that and then go back? How many people go back to building in a different form factor? So if that's going to be the way you're inevitably going to end up, by the people who have done this for a long time and have figured it out way ahead of us and who've tried everything, it's easier to adapt earlier than it is to spend a whole lot of effort in the wrong direction.
All right. With that, let's go ahead and wrap this one up for tonight. I hope that we have driven the point home enough that you can see building a little shelf for yourself, a 6-footer, 8-footer around the room, is going to be one of the better ways to get started and get your layouts off the carpet or off the table, and get more Empire built. With that, tune in on November 21st, same time, same channel. Andy and I are going to be talking about hand-built versus commercial track and turnouts. That's going to run 30 minutes, so it's going to be a pretty quick thing. Make sure you don't miss it. As always, tune into all of the rest of the great content we put out. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell icon for notifications. Have a good night, everybody. We got Big Bill on the 11th, Johnny's telling me. So I got to point that out. Otherwise, I'm going to get fired. All right. Have a good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody. Thanks for coming in.